3 ordinary-looking Roosevelt dimes, a combined value of $939,000. Yet the biggest question isn't how much they're worth, it's why collectors are willing to chase them in the first place. Hidden details, exceptional survival, and one clue that most people mistake for damage could completely change the way you look at the coins in your pocket. A small silver-colored coin sits unnoticed in a jar, a drawer, or the bottom of a pocket. Most people glance at it for less than a second. The date looks common. The design feels familiar. Nothing about it appears extraordinary. Yet experienced collectors often slow down when they encounter certain Roosevelt dimes from 1970. Not because every 1970 dime is rare, because sometimes the difference between an ordinary 10-cent coin and a highly desirable collector piece is hidden in details that most people never think to examine. At first glance, the Roosevelt dime seems straightforward. President Franklin D. Roosevelt faces left on the obverse, a design that had already become a familiar part of everyday American life by 1970. On the reverse, the torch stands between an olive branch and an oak branch, symbolizing liberty, peace, and strength. Millions of Americans handled these coins without giving them a second thought. And that is exactly what makes the investigation so interesting. The year 1970 places this coin in a fascinating period of American history. The nation was entering a new decade. Technology was advancing rapidly. The effects of the space race could still be felt across the country. Families were using cash every day for groceries, gasoline, and everyday purchases. Somewhere during that era, this dime entered circulation. It passed through banks, cash registers, vending machines, countless hands. Decade after decade, many examples became worn, scratched, darkened, or damaged from ordinary use. Today, those circulated pieces tell a story of survival, but they are not necessarily the coins that command the greatest attention from specialists. That attention often begins with a simple question. How well was the coin made when it left the Denver Mint? The small D mint mark beside the date identifies its birthplace. Denver produced enormous numbers of dimes that year, which might seem to eliminate any possibility of collector excitement. But experienced numismatists know that high production does not automatically mean every example is equal. In fact, the opposite can be true. Two 1970 dimes can appear almost identical to an inexperienced observer. Both may have the same date. Both may have the same mint mark. Both may have survived for decades. Yet one might receive little attention, while the other becomes the subject of careful examination under magnification. Why? Because specialists begin looking beyond the date. They study the sharpness of the strike. They inspect the fine details in Roosevelt's hair. They examine the torch on the reverse. They search for evidence of strong original surfaces that escaped decades of abuse. And perhaps most importantly, they ask whether the coin still possesses the appeal it had when it first left the mint. This is where many people stop too soon. A coin may show bright surfaces because it was cleaned. To an inexperienced owner, that might seem desirable. Collectors often see it differently. Harsh cleaning can remove original characteristics that specialists want preserved. Tiny hairline scratches, unnatural brightness, or altered surfaces can reduce collector interest dramatically. Because of that, experienced collectors generally avoid polishing or aggressively cleaning older coins. Once original surfaces are disturbed, they can never truly be restored. Instead, specialists look for authenticity, originality, natural aging, evidence that the coin has survived the decades without unnecessary alteration. And sometimes another layer of investigation begins. Subtle die characteristics, unusual striking details, features that are easy to overlook unless someone knows exactly where to focus their attention. Many coins are dismissed before that examination ever happens. That is one reason important pieces occasionally remain hidden in ordinary collections. As the investigation continues, condition becomes increasingly important. The Roosevelt Dime series is filled with coins that circulated heavily, but examples showing exceptional preservation are a different story entirely. When a coin retains remarkable detail, strong luster, attractive surfaces, and superior visual appeal, collectors begin viewing it through a completely different lens. Suddenly, it is no longer just a dime. It becomes a survivor, a time capsule, a physical object that escaped decades of wear that claimed countless others. That combination of preservation, collector demand, and careful authentication is what can transform an overlooked coin into a serious numismatic prize. And that brings us to the moment that surprises most people. Not because every 1970 Roosevelt dime is worth a fortune, far from it, but because an exceptional example, examined, authenticated, and recognized for the qualities collectors seek, has been associated with values reaching an astonishing $427,000. For a coin that many people would barely notice, that number completely changes the conversation. Suddenly, the tiny details matter. The strike matters. The surfaces matter. The preservation matters. And the difference between ordinary and extraordinary becomes impossible to ignore. Yet this investigation is only beginning, because the next coin doesn't rely on the same kind of story at all. Its mystery isn't hidden primarily in preservation or subtle collector clues. Instead, it centers on a completely different characteristic, one that causes experienced collectors to stop the moment they see it, while most people unknowingly pass it by. Not every remarkable coin earns attention because of a rare error or an unusual variety. Sometimes the real challenge is much simpler and far more difficult. Survival. The 1978 Roosevelt Dime tells a story about survival in a way that few people ever consider. Not survival from a shipwreck, a hidden treasure chest, or a forgotten vault. Survival from something far more destructive to coins over time, everyday life. Every scratch, every pocket, every cash register, every handful of loose change. For decades, millions of dimes passed through American hands without anyone stopping to think about their future. Most fulfilled their purpose and slowly accumulated wear. The sharp details softened. The surfaces picked up marks. The original brilliance faded. That is the normal story. The interesting story begins with the coins that somehow escaped it. The Roosevelt dime had already been part of American commerce for more than 30 years when this 1978 example was struck at the Denver Mint. By then, the design was one of the most recognizable in the country. Americans saw Roosevelt's portrait so often that many barely noticed it anymore. Collectors, however, learned to notice things others ignored. At first glance, a 1978 D dime appears familiar. The date is easy to find. The small D mint mark confirms it was produced in Denver. The torch, olive branch, and oak branch on the reverse remain instantly recognizable. Most people would stop their examination there. Specialists rarely do. Instead, they begin asking a different question. How much of the coin's original character remains? That question changes everything. A typical circulated example may show dull surfaces and softened details from years of handling. Nothing unusual about that. It simply reflects the life of a coin that performed exactly as intended. But occasionally, a survivor appears with a very different story. Under proper lighting, the surfaces may still display vibrant mint luster moving across the coin as it turns. The high points of the design may remain crisp. The lettering may appear unusually sharp. Even the smallest design elements can reveal how carefully the coin preserved its original appearance over the decades. The difference sounds subtle. Visually, it can be dramatic. Two 1978 D dimes may share the same date and mint mark. One might seem ordinary. The other can immediately stand apart, because its preservation allows collectors to see the coin almost as mint. Workers saw it decades ago. And preservation is not something that can be recreated once it is lost. A coin exposed to careless handling accumulates contact marks. Improper storage can introduce discoloration or environmental damage. Harsh cleaning may remove original surfaces entirely. This is why experienced collectors often become cautious when a coin appears unusually bright. The surface tells one story. The strike tells another. Both must agree. A coin can look attractive at first glance, yet reveal signs of alteration under closer examination. Authenticity and originality matter just as much as appearance. That is why serious collectors often rely on professional grading and certification. They want independent confirmation that the coin truly possesses the qualities they believe they are seeing. Only then does the next question emerge. How rare is this level of preservation? That is where the story becomes fascinating. Millions of 1978 D dimes were produced. Yet time has a way of reducing the number of premium survivors. Every decade creates more opportunities for damage, mishandling, cleaning, and wear. As a result, exceptionally, preserved examples can become far more desirable than the average coin bearing the same date. Collectors are not simply competing for a 1978 D dime. They are competing for one of the finest surviving examples they can find. That distinction matters enormously. When specialists encounter a coin with strong eye appeal, impressive preservation, sharp details, original surfaces, and the characteristics expected of a premium survivor, interest rises quickly. The coin transforms from everyday change into a serious collectible, and only after understanding that journey does the value begin to make sense. For an exceptional 1978 D, Roosevelt Dime that meets the demanding standards collectors seek, values have been associated with figures reaching approximately $321,000. Not because it is merely old, not because it is a dime, but because exceptional survival can be every bit as important as rarity itself. Yet preservation is only one path to collector fascination. The final coin in this investigation follows a completely different trail. Its story may challenge the assumption that valuable coins must look extraordinary at first glance. In fact, the most important clue on the next coin is something many people see and misunderstand every single time they encounter it. A dark spot, an unusual patch of color, a strange surface mark. For most people, that is the moment a coin loses attention. The assumption comes quickly. Damaged, dirty, worn out, nothing special. Yet some of the most interesting investigations in American numismatics begin exactly where casual observation ends. The 1984 Roosevelt Dime from Philadelphia is a perfect example of that contradiction. At first glance, it may appear ordinary. In some cases, it may even appear flawed. But the closer collectors look, the more complicated the story becomes. And complexity is where serious coin research often begins. By 1984, the Roosevelt Dime had already been part of American life for nearly 4 decades. It was one of the nation's most familiar coins, passing through grocery stores, restaurants, gas stations, vending machines, and banks every day. Few people stopped to study one. Even fewer imagined that. Decades later, collectors would examine certain examples under magnification, searching for clues hidden within a coin smaller than a thumb. The Philadelphia Mint produced these dimes without a mint mark, a detail that immediately separates this coin from the previous. Denver issues in the investigation. To most Americans, that missing letter means nothing. To collectors, it is the first piece of evidence, but it is rarely the last. On the surface, a 1984 P dime may tell a simple story. Years of circulation can leave behind scratches, contact marks, dullness, discoloration, or areas of uneven toning. Environmental exposure can also change how the metal looks over time. That is where science quietly enters the conversation. Metal reacts to its surroundings: humidity, air, storage materials, temperature changes, even the containers used to store. Coins can influence how surfaces develop over the years. As a result, a coin's appearance can evolve long after it leaves the mint. The challenge is determining what that appearance actually means. A dark area might simply be environmental exposure. An unusual color might be natural toning. A strange-looking patch might be ordinary damage, or it might signal something worth investigating further. Experienced collectors would not stop at the first impression. They begin asking questions. Are the surfaces original? Does the coloration appear natural? Is there evidence of cleaning? Could an unusual feature be related to the minting process itself? Has the coin been altered after leaving circulation? These questions matter because unusual, appearance, and collector value are not the same thing. A coin can look unique and still hold little numismatic significance. Likewise, a subtle characteristic that most people overlook can attract serious collector interest when supported by evidence and authentication. This distinction separates curiosity from true collectability. Most examples tell one story. Exceptional examples tell another. The investigation becomes even more interesting when condition enters the equation. A coin with unusual characteristics may attract attention, but collectors still want preservation, originality, and authenticity. Strong details in Roosevelt's portrait, clean lettering, attractive surfaces, and evidence of careful survival often influence how specialists evaluate a piece. That is why professional certification remains so important. Appearance alone is not proof. A knowledgeable collector wants confirmation. They want documentation. They want expert examination. Only then can the coin's place within the market be understood. And that understanding often surprises people. Not because every 1984 P Roosevelt dime is rare. Not because every unusual-looking example deserves attention. But because a genuinely exceptional specimen, one that combines originality, strong preservation, collector appeal, and characteristics worthy of deeper study, can stand far above ordinary examples of the same date. By the time that conclusion is reached, the coin is no longer being judged by first impressions. It is being judged by evidence, by survival, by authenticity, by collector demand. And that is when the final number enters the story. For a remarkable 1984, Roosevelt Dime from Philadelphia, that exhibits the qualities specialists seek and has, received the level of examination serious collectors expect. Values have been associated with figures reaching approximately 191,000, not because it looked unusual, not because it looked old, but because careful investigation revealed a far more important truth. Appearance alone never tells the whole story. Across these three Roosevelt dimes, the path to collector interest followed three very different directions. One rewarded attention to details that most people overlook. Another demonstrated how extraordinary preservation can transform an ordinary coin into a premium survivor. And this final piece showed that an unusual appearance is only the beginning of the investigation, not the conclusion. That may be the most valuable lesson hidden inside American coin collecting. A coin's importance is not always visible at first glance. Sometimes the clue is hidden in a tiny detail, a preserved surface, or a misunderstood characteristic that deserves a second look. History survives in small objects. It travels through pockets, drawers, collections, and generations. And every so often, the difference between an ordinary coin and an extraordinary one is concealed within a detail so small that almost everyone passes by it without ever knowing what they missed.